I married my favorite inmate. Somebody tell me this does not happen. Well, unfortunately it does, and let's say this right up front. There's a few in the corrections field who end up marrying their favorite inmate. It's a fact of life. Not trying to badmouth anybody. It's just a fact of life, and we have to deal with it, and we have to stop it when we find out there's an inmate-staff relationship. So I'm going to give you 3, maybe 4 real-life incidents that happen here in my state of Florida in the prison system, and hope some of you have some stories. Now, why am I talking about I married my favorite inmate? I've had 3 or 4 requests about people asking me about staff-inmate relationships. How often does it happen? Well, the answer to that is it doesn't happen that often. But when it does happen, then it's the big talk of the town because, you know, Officer Jones just got walked out the gate, terminated for having a relationship with an inmate, or, you know, things like that. So it's a few that stir the pot, let's say that. And I'll give you a few examples. When I first came into corrections, I worked for a lieutenant at the state prison, and he was also in training. So when I went through the academy, he was there for a lot of the classes, and he hated inmates. I hate inmates. They're scumbags. They're not worth a dang. They're dirty, you know. And so you think, okay, we have a lieutenant here who definitely is going to make sure the inmates walk the line and do what they're supposed to do. Well, that was all fine and dandy until the prison went from a male institution and switched over to a female institution. He then started talking to a female inmate. She started giving him notes and letters, and they fell in love. The lieutenant, who couldn't stand dirty inmates, fell in love with a female inmate. Well, just like it always happens, eventually there was too much talk between the two. Other officers started to notice some things, maybe a little favoritism here and there. Long story short, he went under investigation. The Inspector General's office comes in to investigate him. He resigns and gets out of Dodge. Before he can finish his retirement, I believe, he may have had 25 years in. I am not sure, but he was so close to the full 25-year retirement that we have here. So, what happens? She gets out of prison, and he marries her. Okay? So, when somebody just constantly brags how much they hate inmates, be careful. Be careful what happens. Don't cross that line. Don't hate them and then love them. Okay? Inmates are not our friends. We're there for care, custody, and control. Get them through their time and get them out. That's it, folks. We don't play with them. We don't marry them. Okay? Unless you just want to marry an inmate, then turn your uniform in and put your badge on the table before you go under investigation, and wait for your newly found loved one to get out of prison. All right, another story. We had a lieutenant who was married to a sergeant, and they both worked in the prison system, and she started an affair with a male inmate, ended up divorcing the lieutenant, and when the inmate got out, she married that inmate. As far as I know, they're still married today. I don't know. I haven't checked. You know, so for those of you who have been asking me, how often do correctional officer staff marry an inmate? Well, there's 2 I just gave you. Far and few between, remember, as I said in the beginning. But the thing is, when this happens, the story lasts for years, and people talk about it, and it blows up. Remember, this is not your everyday occurrence, folks. I'm just answering your questions. It does happen. It's life. It's the truth. Another case that came up, we had a colonel married to a dental assistant. Both worked at the same prison. She was having a relationship with the dental orderly. Yes, everybody was done. The day was done. It was time to clean up the dental office and get it ready for the next day. But as we found out later in the investigation, they did more than just clean up the dental area for the next day. They got in that dental chair, folks. Need I explain more? Result, she's terminated, divorce. Result in the second case I told you with the lieutenant and the sergeant, of course. Result, terminated, divorce, marry the inmate. I do not know in this other story about the dental assistant if she waited to marry the inmate. But I was asked also about staff-inmate relationships. So there's one that started in the dental office with an inmate orderly. See, the inmate had a lot of time to woo her, tell her things, slowly manipulate her. You know, in all these cases, we have manipulation, taking process. Inmates pick their prey and see what they can do. See how they can maneuver into the situation. Very interesting how that happens and how the inmates somehow know and how they can pick out a person to manipulate. Anthony Ganji and I just did a video on inmate manipulation, which is one of his classes he teaches, and he just wrote a book on it. And very interesting point was made. They give the officer the power, or in other words, they make the officer believe that they're in charge. They have the power, but the whole time the inmate is the one in charge. But they lead the officer to believe they're in charge and they're making all the decisions. Keep that in mind when you're out there, folks. Don't let them manipulate you to where you slightly drop your guard, catch that guard and put it back up. That's what the inmates are there for, to try to have relationships with staff members if they can. And believe me, they're going to try. And I'll give you a fourth one. 2 sergeants working at the same prison. This one's in my book, Corruption Behind Bars. Sergeant worked in the laundry room with an inmate, and the husband sergeant worked outside grounds. So he was always outside and away from the laundry room. And the female sergeant got wooed by an inmate who was in for life for murder. He worked for her. She had her desk here in the laundry room, and he had her desk behind her. There was just a little window area with a door that went through, and he worked there, you know, keeping the books and all this. So they had a lot of time together 5 days a week in the laundry room, and he wooed her and manipulated her. And I will not say they had sex because she did not admit to that when I interviewed her, but she did tell me. We found some paddles in her desk. We found some notes. We moved file cabinets and found letters that they were giving to each other. I subpoenaed her phone records, and she had constantly been talking with his relatives in another couple of towns over, so it was a long-distance phone call, and clearly were recorded on there. And I went and interviewed the inmates' family members who said, oh yes, called her by first name, we love her, she's very nice. She volunteered to work visitation on the weekends because they were short-staffed after working 5 days in the laundry room. And they said how nice she was in visitation to them. Wow. All of a sudden you start to volunteer to work in visitation. Well, that can be a good thing, right? And we like that. But her motive was not to make the overtime money working in visitation. Her motive was to get in there to meet his relatives, the inmate's relatives. She admitted to kissing the inmate. She admitted to them paddling each other with these paddles that I had laid out on the desk in front of her. Now, folks, if you're kissing an inmate and you're paddling each other in the back of the laundry room, well, let's just leave the rest of the story open. We don't know if they ever had sex or not. What do you think? Anyway, there's 4 stories. Now, she did tell, the relatives told me they knew that the plan between the female laundry room sergeant, who was married, as I said, to another sergeant, their plan was to marry one day. Well, how are you going to, this guy's in for life. So who's manipulating who here? She's telling the inmate she'll marry him, probably knowing that she was never going to marry him. He's not going to get out of prison. She's married to another sergeant. Oh, that did not end in divorce, folks. The male sergeant and her are still together. It's their life. Forgive and forget, I guess. But they're still together. So that's one that did not end in a divorce. But it's really strange, isn't it? How married couples working in a prison have all these stories. I'm not going to get into great detail. We all know the Clinton escape. Joyce Mitchell, who worked in a sewing room. Her husband was a maintenance man. There's another example of two couples working together in a prison. And she's over there having sex with two inmates in the sewing room and helping them escape. And there's another example of a man who waited for her to serve her prison sentence for aiding in the escape and having sex with inmates and still loves her. For another forgive and forget story. So see, I've given you examples of officers and civilian staff married to people who work in the prison with them and still having affairs with inmates. Right under their nose, as they say. Right under their nose. Unbelievable, right? So for those of you that ask me about these staff-inmate relationships, they occur. And when they do, they end in termination. If the sexual relation is proven beyond a doubt, or at least if the state attorney thinks they can prove it beyond a doubt, it will go to criminal charges for third-degree felony here in Florida for having sexual relations with inmates. And, as in the Joyce Mitchell case up there in upper state New York, she went to prison for her shenanigans with the two inmates. But not always will the spouse leave their partner who has sex with their favorite inmate. They won't always leave them and divorce them. I can tell you right now, I would be at the get me a divorce attorney and say, how fast can you get me these papers going? I need out of this marriage. A lot of people are probably laughing at that right now, but hey, if an inmate's their choice, I need to move on. I need to get out of that situation. Watch out for the inmate manipulation. Watch out for some complacency. I've always said complacency and inmate manipulation intertwine, and that's when you let your guard down, and that's when you fall. Stay safe, everybody. Happy New Year. Wow, it's my first video of 2021, I just realized. Happy New Year. Thank all you good, honest, hardworking officers for what you do, sticking with the job, staying with it through thick and thin. Thank you. We need you. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay honest. Gary York, True Prison Stories.